Today in Papa's workshop, we're building two tables just like this. Now these are gaming tables most commonly used for the Warhammer game, and it's designed specifically for that game. It has a shelf on the top, is recessed down into the area where you can have the playing surface, and of course it has a shelf underneath to be able to store the game pieces, and it's a good place to put your foot every now and then when you're trying to rest for just a moment while playing the game. So follow along today as we take the opportunity to show you step by step exactly how these two tables were actually built and assembled right here in Papa's workshop. Let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be a fun project to do. I want to start and cut the actual size of the table itself. And this is going to be 45 inches wide by 84 inches. And that gives them plenty of room for the game board itself, plus room to set the armies off to the side. Once the tabletop is actually cut, everything else will be built around this tabletop. I'm real fortunate to have my son in the shop today. This plywood is extremely warped. I cannot believe how bad that this is. But I guess it's part of the times that we're living in, and this is all we can get. But his help was just exceptional to be able to get this cut and built on this project, because every single piece of plywood was warped. And you can see it in this video just how bad that it was. He was literally holding one side down. I had the other side lifted up almost to the top of the fence, and it was still warped. You can see the space above the table saw itself, that little bit of air gap. This is just absolutely crazy. But in the end, we got it cut, and that's the important thing. Now, since we're building two of these tables, I went ahead and took another sheet of plywood and ripped it down to the 45 inches wide. Now I want to make sure that the circular saw is unplugged, and I want to show you how to set up a track saw without having a track saw. So to do that, I set the blade right at the edge of the material. Then I measure from the edge of the material over to the edge of the base of the saw. Now in my case, it's 3 3/4 of an inch. Your saw may be different. So this is the measurement that I have to be able to offset the strip of plywood that I'm going to use. I have to cross cut this plywood down to 84 inches. So when I set this measurement up, I mark it exactly where it needs to be at the 84 inches. Then I back up that 3 3/4 of an inch. That's where my board actually gets clamped down. Once it's clamped down, guess what, guys? You got a track saw. It's easy to be able to cut that. So let's grab the ear muffs, and now that we've got everything clamped down, I'm going to show you just how easy it is to be able to make this cross cut and to be able to, in effect, have a very inexpensive track saw. Now this is much easier to be able to cut it rather than trying to use the table saw, because there's just too much material that's going to be hanging out the edge of the table saw, and it's just not safe. So this by far is the easiest and the most cost-effective way to do it. I don't have a track saw, but this works extremely well. Now this is the second sheet of plywood, and again, this is just show you how easy it is. All I need to do is measure from the end of the plywood up to that point where that board will get clamped down. I'll make a mark on each side, and then I take the finished edge right there. You see the writing on the plywood. That's the manufacturer's edge. That will give you the straightest cut possible. And I just line it up with a pencil mark on each side and then clamp it down. Guys, if you can't afford a track saw, this is an easy way to do it. And once it's clamped, you just grab the circular saw and you can cut a perfect straight line. A quick look at our detailed, highly sophisticated set of plans for this table. And I need to have the detail on what we're going to do with the side of this tabletop. So we're going to make this 6 inches, and it's actually going to be just slightly less than 6 inches. We're utilizing every bit of the plywood possible without having virtually any waste at all. Now on the top, I'm going to put a shelf on there. This shelf started out to design was going to be 4 inches, But based on the available material, and again, not to waste anything, we made this 3 3/4 inches wide. To be able to get it the extra support that it's going to need, I'm going to take some little plywood blocks and we're going to put underneath that to be able to support that little shelf. And these can be little triangle blocks like this, and these will be about 3 inches by 3 inches, and that will work perfect. Now as far as the tabletop itself, that is going to be down 3 inches from the top, so that's where it'll be. The rest will be hanging below. That will be supported by the table base itself, so that way it will be plenty strong. So with this information now in hand, let's get it back to building. Okay, here we are back at the table saw, and I'm taking that piece that I cut off of the ends of the plywood, and this is going to make the front and back of the 6-inch piece. Now I ended up cutting this 5 7/8 of an inch rather than the 6 inches. That way I could utilize both sections of this and make it fit perfectly. So again, I want to be able to have virtually no waste. Plywood's too expensive, and with this design, in some cases, we kind of made it up as we went along to be able to utilize every square bit of this plywood that we possibly could. The goal was to have really no waste at all. And this is what we did. And we had to tweak the measurements from time to time, but in the end, it worked out very nicely. Now my shop's fairly small, and the tabletop is part of my outfeed table, but I still need to be able to rip some additional plywood. Oh, there's only one solution. I raised up the table base onto 4 paint cans, and that allowed me to be able to continue to rip the plywood that I need, but it also provided the support. Now this was important because remember, this 6-inch piece of plywood goes above and below this tabletop, so it needed to be raised up off the table, but it also still served as a good opportunity to continue to use the table saw and effectively use the outfeed table to be able to receive the plywood that I cut. Now this is 2 really good tips already in this video, and we've got some more to come. Now at the miter saw, I went ahead and set up my stop block, and I cut these again to consider the amount of wood. There was virtually no waste again, but I cut all of these spacers that go inside of that tabletop to add that support that we need. Now it's time to move on with doing some assembly. I went ahead and put the 6-inch piece down on the end and nailed it in, and I have my shelf all aligned properly, and of course there's glue everywhere, and then we can just nail it in place. Now because this plywood is so warped, we had to work it very carefully, moving this left and right to make sure that it was flush on the ends. This is the other end of the tabletop with the 6-inch piece already put on, and I'm putting on now the shelf. Now again, we're using glue, and lots of glue. In fact, we just filled up this container from my 1-gallon jug of glue. I know some of you have commented in the past on some of the projects where I did not use the glue that you think that I should have used. Well, in this case, we use glue and lots of it. So it's now time to go ahead and add the shelf. And again, we're going to have to nail this very carefully to be able to make sure that this is flush to this vertical piece. Once we have it in place, then we're taking the little finishing nailing gun and shooting it into position. And again, we check this before each nail is put in to make sure that it's flush. Back at the miter saw, we have some additional cutting to do, and I need to cut these shelf on the long side of my table to the proper length. And this is the best tool to be able to do that with. So I went ahead and cut all 4, 2 for this table and of course 2 for the other table. One of the things that we try to do is do all of our cuts at one time to minimize the time that it took to be able to build these tables. And yes, we did build both of these tables at once. So while he was working on one side, I was preparing to put the other side on. And of course, yep, we had a glue, and we're going to put that all along this area. You can see the little support blocks there where I'm putting the glue on. And then it was time to be able to grab this piece and put it on. And it really helped having him in the shop, because it makes it so much easier to be able to have 2 in the shop to be able to help hold, support, and build. So we wanted to make sure that that was flush. We clamped it in place. And then, what you can't see in the camera, I have a line on this side where I can nail it exactly where it needs to be all the way down. On the other side of this piece of plywood, against the tabletop itself, there's another line. That line had to be straight and to make sure that that tabletop wasn't bowed. Time to add the glue again and put on the top shelf. The nice thing is he's on one end, I'm on the other. That gives us the opportunity to be able to line this perfectly. We want to make sure that that top edge is flush with the adjoining piece, and on the vertical portion we have to move this board in and out just ever so slightly to make sure that it's flush on the inside. Then just nail it with the glue and that's going to hold just perfectly fine. And that's going to make a nice surface for them to put the different pieces on, maybe some drink cups, who knows what will be on this little shelf. To the other side, it's time to put this vertical piece in. No tape measures required. We're just going to align it and then mark this and cut it. One less way of having an error. If you measure twice and cut once, well, sometimes it's still wrong. This way, there's no mistakes. How do you cut a piece of plywood without having all the tear out? With a circular saw. Well, I've already shown you the track saw method. Now I'm showing you how to cut this without having any tear out. You put down a piece of painter's tape right on the cut line, and then you're able to cut. Because remember, this blade is turning upward, and this is the finished side of the plywood. Without this tape, you're going to get a lot of tear out. Well, this solves the problem. So here you get to see both in action. One, a cheap, inexpensive track saw, and a easy, simple, inexpensive way to be able to eliminate the tear out by simply using the tape. And by removing the tape now, you can see the end results. And it looks absolutely perfect. If you didn't know any better, you'd think that would be a manufacturer's edge. I have this tabletop now removed from the workbench and is sitting on another table. And of course it's upside down. At this point you can see each corner with the reinforcements we have installed. And that's going to help support the legs themselves. And you can see the shelf there. Now it's time to build that base. And I have the legs measured out with my stop block to be able to cut. Now these are going to be 3 7/8 of an inch. I couldn't quite do the 4 inches because of the material, but I don't think anybody will notice an 1/8 of an inch less. So I have to cut all of these down to the 3 7/8, and then I'll cut the other ones down 3/4 of an inch shorter than that. Now as far as these legs are actually 29 1/4 inches long. We are going to put a piece of plywood block on each end of them to be able to add some additional support. And while my son's building the legs, I want to be able to go ahead and cut these little blocks using the table saw sled. These are being cut 3 inches by 3 inches. And then from there, I'm going to turn and cut these to a 45-degree angle. Now I'm cutting enough of these blocks for both tables. I need 10 for each table to give it the support that I want for that shelf. Back to the table legs themselves. They're all assembled, and it was just a matter of nailing those together to form a 90-degree angle, and you can see the block at the bottom that gives the extra support. Now this is the runner that we're putting in next, and it is going to help give the support and the strength that's necessary to these legs, because this base is going to be separate from the tabletop. If any reason it needs to be transported, you can just lift off the tabletop and have the base separate from that top. Again, you can see plenty of glue and nails being used to secure this to these upright legs. The other very important thing I want to show you, you see that little gap there? That's important. We're going to slide that leg down where it closes that gap. And that leaves a little bit of a space. That's actually about 3/16 of an inch. That is going to allow for a little bit of room when you put that tabletop onto this base. So that's very important. You do not want that totally tight. Now back to the table saw. I cut these in one direction. Now I have to be able to rotate them 90 degrees and cut this one more time. So these are going to be my 3" by 3" squares. With all those cut, it's now time to cut the 45 degrees. The nice thing about having the table saw sled, that corner fits right into that groove and it's perfect. It does not move, it holds very well. And the other end of the notch is going to be right in line with where the saw blade is. This gives you a perfect 45-degree angle. I'm holding the outer edge of this block so my fingers are well away from the blade. If this is something though that you're not comfortable with, please do it another way. I'm very comfortable with the table saw and using this method. So remember, safety first, and you have to be comfortable with any cut that you make in your shop. So find the safest, best way for you to do this in your shop. This is not an instructional video on how to cut these little blocks. This is just how I do it. So after just a couple of minutes, I have all these blocks cut, and they're the perfect 45-degree angle that I need to be able to put onto this shelf. Back at the table itself, we're going to put glue on these triangle pieces, and with everything marked for the exact location, we're putting 3 on each side of the long side, 2 on the short side of this table. So we push that right down in place, and of course, in addition to the glue, we're going to add the nails. At each of the corners of this table, we're going to treat this a little bit differently. We're going to use some square blocks of wood. At the table saw, I just have the stop block in position, and I'm going to cut these to size. Here's a look at the corner on what we're going to be able to do. We already have one piece that extends all the way to the end of the shelf. This extra piece there is going to thicken that, and then we'll put 2 pieces here. That way it'll give the appearance of a nice, bold, sturdy, strong corner. I'm attaching the hose with a adapter that I made on the CNC machine, and this works really well. It just connects the hoses without any problem whatsoever, and that's perfect. I'm using the Armor pocket hole jig to be able to put the pocket holes in one of those pieces of the wood for each corner. I'll be able to secure that to the table, and then I'll put my second piece of wood in position to be able to cover up those pocket holes. Of course, it's going to get glued and screwed into position. I really like the Armor pocket hole jig. With the vacuum attachment, it's virtually dust free. It captures all of the dust, and it makes for a very clean operation. To install these blocks, I'm going to add glue, and lots of glue, on each of the sides to be able to support this. I have a line already on the tabletop exactly where this needs to be positioned. With the glue installed, let's put this right on that line, and we'll be able to screw it in. And I have the 2 pocket holes with the screws in it, and then I can just drill it, and that is going to hold it really, really well. Now, to be able to cover up these holes, I have the second block now that will be able to go right on top of this one. I'm adding the glue that will support it on not only the block that I just installed, but the glue will hold onto the tabletop itself. That just drops right in position just like that, and it will get nailed right into the permanent spot for it, and there's nothing else that's required to do. The final step on this table is to put these little registration blocks in. This is important so that the tabletop doesn't do a lot of moving around when you put the top onto the base. You can see the notch there where my son's hand is located. That's where that table leg is going to fit right into that point. These little registration blocks are going to be a nice feature to be able to have should they need to be able to move this and take the top off the base. Now that the glue is installed, just nail them, and that will take care of it. So 1 down, 3 to go. Moving on to the second one, we're adding glue to the block, and we'll repeat the same process that we did on the previous corner. The last step is to put the stretchers in across the bottom. Now I have these little blocks in here to be able to act as a guide. Of course, we used the glue, and we're going to nail these into position. Now these act to be able to do two things. One, it supports the legs, and the other thing it does is support the shelf that we're going to put at the bottom. Now, in addition to that, it's important to note that you have to measure to get the proper length down at the top of the table, which in this case is down below, because those legs could be just slightly out of plumb. But at any rate, once you have it cut to length, glue and nail it in position. Now these stretchers, or ribbon if you will, goes all the way around, and that will support all four of the legs. The little blocks that we have clamped in position allows for the fact that we don't need a tape measure. All we need to do is just slide it right up in position where it hits those little blocks, and the fact that these stretchers are exactly the correct length, all we need to do then is just pull the leg over where it gives a nice tight fit. Once that's done, then just nail it in position. It's just that easy. Now that large piece of plywood that you see there is actually the shelf that's going to drop right down onto these stretchers. And it's easier to be able to put this in first, then we'll flip over this table base and be able to drop that shelf right down. So let me show you. The stretchers are all done. We'll remove all the little blocks. We'll flip over this table base, and it's time to be able to put the glue onto the stretchers and let this plywood just drop right down where it needs to be. We are using the nails and the glue to be able to secure this shelf into position. It's important to note that this table actually is in two parts. You have the table base that you see here, and then you have the tabletop. So should you need to be able to move it or transport it, it'll be easy to do. The shelf itself that you see there is permanently attached, and rightfully so. It does add a lot of strength to the table base, and I'm sure it's going to get a lot of use with storing items. Now these two gaming tables were a lot of fun to be able to design and build, and I know that they're going to get a lot of use over the years to come. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for watching the video today, and I especially want to thank the subscribers and my Patreons for being able to support this channel. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't subscribed yet, I hope that you'll choose to do so, because I have a lot of different videos on many different topics around woodworking, CNC, and the lasers, and you don't want to miss out on that. So again, thank you so much for watching today, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in the next video that I do, whatever that may be.